In just 67 seconds, $8.7 million in hidden payments, 23 shell companies, and a web of corruption spanning 3 years were about to explode on live television. Jasmine Crockett didn't expect the panic in Judge Jeanine's eyes. Fox News producers didn't expect the emergency commercial break. America didn't expect to watch one of cable news's most powerful voices completely unravel when confronted with documents she thought were buried forever. The cameras captured every devastating second. Millions of viewers watched as a media empire built on credibility crumbled in real time. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was the sound of a cover-up collapsing under the weight of its own lies. What happened in those 67 seconds changed everything. And what came next would shake the foundation of political media in America. Let me paint you a picture of the battlefield. On one side, Jasmine Crockett, 42 years old, civil rights attorney turned congresswoman, a woman who spent her legal career taking on powerful institutions and winning. She'd defended voting rights against state legislatures. She'd fought police misconduct cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. She'd built a reputation on one simple principle: the truth matters, no matter who it embarrasses. When she was elected to Congress in 2022, representing Texas's 30th district, the political establishment thought they knew what to expect. Another freshman representative, someone who'd learn the rules, play the game, wait their turn to speak, they were dead wrong. From day one, Crockett refused to sit quietly. She questioned everything. She read every bill, every amendment, every piece of fine print that career politicians glossed over. And she had a gift, a dangerous gift for those with secrets. She could translate complex legal corruption into plain English that ordinary Americans could understand. She wasn't there to climb the ladder. She was there to shake it until the rot fell out. On the other side, Judge Jeanine Pirro, 73 years old, former district attorney, former judge, and for over a decade, one of the most powerful voices in conservative media. Justice with Judge Jeanine wasn't just a TV show. It was an institution. Every Saturday night, millions tuned in to watch her fiery opening statements, her aggressive interviews, her unwavering defense of conservative principles. She'd written best-selling books. She'd interviewed presidents. She'd become a kingmaker in Republican politics. Her word could make or break careers. Her endorsement was worth millions in fundraising. Politicians feared her criticism and courted her approval. But there was something else about Judge Jeanine Pirro, something that didn't make it into her official biography, something that existed in the shadows behind the studio lights and carefully scripted commentary, a secret financial empire built on a simple transaction, pay to play. And Jasmine Crockett had found the receipts. It started with insomnia and a hunch. 3 months before that explosive 67-second moment, Crockett was in her congressional office at 2 a.m., doing what she'd done as an attorney for years, following the money. She'd been investigating conflicts of interest in political media. It wasn't glamorous work. It was spreadsheets and financial disclosures, cross-referencing corporate filings with media appearances, tracking the flow of money through layers of intermediaries designed to hide the truth. Most of her colleagues thought she was wasting her time. That's just how the game works, they told her. Everyone knows media personalities have side deals, but Crockett wasn't interested in how the game works. She was interested in whether the game was rigged, and then she found it, a payment of $2.3 million from something called American Prosperity Advisors, LLC, to JJP Consulting Services. The payment was listed in a dense disclosure form, buried on page 247 of 300, described in the vaguest possible terms. Advisory services rendered.
JJP Consulting Services. JJP, Jeanine Pirro.
Crockett's pulse quickened. She started digging deeper. What she found was breathtaking in its audacity. American Prosperity Advisors wasn't a real company. It was a shell. It had no employees, no office, no business operations. It existed only on paper, registered to a law firm in Delaware that specialized in creating anonymous corporate entities. But the money flowing into American Prosperity Advisors? That was very real. She traced it back to 3 pharmaceutical companies, 2 defense contractors, and a consortium of energy corporations. All of them had major legislative interests. All of them were fighting regulations that would cost them billions. All of them needed public opinion on their side. And all of them were paying Judge Jeanine Pirro through a network of shell companies designed to hide the connection. The $2.3 million was just the beginning. Over the next 3 weeks, working late into the night, Crockett and a small team of researchers she trusted uncovered the full scope of the operation. $8.7 million in total payments over 3 years, 23 different shell companies, each designed to obscure the source of the money. 47 separate consulting and advisory contracts that required no actual work product, and a perfect correlation between the money Judge Jeanine received and the positions she advocated on her show. When pharmaceutical companies paid her in January, she spent February attacking Medicare drug price negotiations. When energy companies funded her in March, she dedicated April to defending fossil fuel subsidies and attacking clean energy initiatives. When defense contractors paid her in June, she spent the summer arguing for increased military spending and opposing oversight measures. It wasn't journalism, it wasn't even political commentary. It was legalized bribery, packaged as media punditry, delivered to millions of Americans who had no idea they were watching purchased propaganda. But here's what made it even more sinister. Judge Jeanine wasn't just influencing public opinion, she was influencing legislation. Crockett discovered that in at least 17 instances, Judge Jeanine had interviewed congressmen and senators on her show, pressing them on specific legislative issues where she had undisclosed financial interests. She'd praised politicians who voted the right way and savaged those who didn't. And it worked. 3 bills that would have increased pharmaceutical regulations died after Judge Jeanine spent weeks attacking them on air. A proposed windfall profits tax on oil companies collapsed after she dedicated her show to calling it socialist overreach. Defense spending increased by $40 billion after she spent months fear-mongering about military readiness. Each time, the industries that benefited were the same ones secretly paying her millions. Crockett had uncovered something bigger than simple corruption. She'd found a systematic scheme to use the appearance of independent journalism to manipulate the democratic process, and she knew exactly what she had to do with this information. Jasmine Crockett understood something crucial. Information without strategy is just noise. She couldn't just release the documents. A report buried in committee wouldn't make headlines. A press release would be dismissed as partisan attacks. She needed something that would cut through the noise. Something that would force the media to cover their own corruption. She needed to confront Judge Jeanine directly, on camera, with evidence she couldn't deny. But how do you get a Fox News host to face questions they don't want to answer? The answer came from an unlikely source. An invitation. In early October, Fox News was planning a special primetime panel on congressional oversight and government accountability. They wanted diverse voices, including some Democrats, to show balance. The producers reached out to several freshman representatives looking for someone who could articulate the Democratic position without being too extreme. Jasmine Crockett was on their list. When her office received the invitation, her chief of staff was skeptical. "It's a trap," he warned. "They'll edit you to make you look bad. They'll talk over you. They'll set you up." Crockett smiled. "I'm counting on them trying." She accepted the invitation but made one condition. If they asked her about media accountability and conflicts of interest, she wanted time to present evidence. The producers agreed. After all, they thought she'd be talking about CNN or MSNBC, maybe taking shots at the liberal media bias. They had no idea she had Fox News in her crosshairs. For the next 3 weeks, Crockett prepared like she was going to trial. She organized her evidence into a devastating narrative. She had bank records showing the shell company payments. She had corporate filings proving the companies were fronts. She had a timeline matching Judge Jeanine's on-air positions with her hidden payments. She had clips from Judge Jeanine's own show demonstrating the perfect correlation between money received and positions advocated. But most importantly, she had something Judge Jeanine didn't know existed. Testimony from a whistleblower inside one of the shell companies who was willing to confirm the scheme. This wasn't just documentation. This was a prosecutorial case, ready to be presented to the jury of public opinion. Crockett also did something clever. She didn't tell anyone the full scope of what she was planning. Her leadership knew she had some information about media conflicts of interest, but they didn't know she was specifically targeting Fox News' second biggest star. If word had leaked, the invitation would have been rescinded immediately. The producers certainly didn't know. They thought they were getting a relatively unknown congresswoman who might generate some mild controversy and decent ratings. They had no idea they were about to broadcast a political execution. The day of the taping arrived, October 17th, a Tuesday evening. The panel was scheduled for 8 p.m., prime time for Fox News' audience. The format was simple: a moderator and 4 panelists discussing congressional oversight with a focus on accountability and transparency in government. The irony was almost too perfect. Crockett arrived at the Fox News studios in Midtown Manhattan 3 hours early. She reviewed her notes one final time. She practiced her delivery, making sure she could say what needed to be said in 60 seconds or less. She knew they'd try to cut her off, and she needed to get the key facts out before they could. At 7:15 p.m., she was escorted to the green room, and that's when she learned something that changed her entire strategy. Judge Jeanine Pirro would be on the panel. This wasn't in the original plan. Jeanine normally hosted her own show on Saturdays. But apparently, the network thought having their star legal analyst on a panel about government accountability would boost ratings. They just handed Crockett the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to confront Judge Jeanine face to face, on live television, with millions watching. When Crockett walked into the studio and saw Judge Jeanine sitting at the panel desk, their eyes met for just a moment. Jeanine gave her a polite nod, the casual acknowledgement one media personality gives another. Crockett smiled back, but inside her attorney instincts kicked into overdrive. She was about to cross-examine a hostile witness, and the witness had no idea what was coming. The moderator opened the show with a standard introduction. The panel made small talk. They discussed some routine congressional business. Everything was proceeding normally. And then, 23 minutes into the broadcast, the moderator asked the question that would change everything. "Congresswoman Crockett, you've been vocal about transparency and conflicts of interest in government. What do you think is the biggest accountability problem we're facing today?" This was her moment. Crockett leaned forward slightly, looked directly into the camera, and began to speak. Chapter 4. The 67 seconds that changed everything. 11:15, 16:30. Thank you for that question, because the biggest accountability problem isn't just in government, it's in the media that covers government. You could feel the energy in the studio shift. The moderator tensed slightly. Judge Jeanine's expression flickered, just for a second, from polite attention to something harder to read. Crockett continued, her voice steady and clear. "For the past 3 months, my office has been investigating undisclosed financial relationships between media personalities and the industries they cover, and what we found is deeply troubling." She pulled out a single sheet of paper, a prop she'd prepared specifically for this moment. The document was clearly visible to the cameras, bank transfer records with the amounts highlighted in yellow. "We discovered that certain prominent media figures have received millions of dollars from shell companies funded by corporations with legislative interests before Congress. These payments were never disclosed to viewers, and remarkably, these media figures consistently advocate for positions that benefit the exact corporations secretly paying them." The moderator tried to interrupt. "Congresswoman, if you have specific allegations..." But Crockett was ready. She'd timed this precisely. She kept talking, her attorney training kicking in. "Control the courtroom, don't let them derail your argument. I do have specific allegations. For example, one prominent host received $8.7 million over 3 years from 23 different shell companies. Those shell companies were funded by pharmaceutical corporations, energy companies, and defense contractors. And that host spent those same 3 years attacking every single piece of legislation that would regulate those industries." Judge Jeanine's face had gone white. She knew, in that instant, she knew exactly what was happening. "Congresswoman," the moderator's voice was sharp now, urgent. "You need to be very careful about what you're alleging." "I'm being extremely careful," Crockett cut in, her voice like steel. "I have bank records, I have corporate filings, I have a timeline matching payments to on-air advocacy. I have a whistleblower willing to testify. And I have one question for Judge Jeanine Pirro. She turned to look directly at Jeanine, and millions of viewers at home watched as one of Fox News' most formidable personalities looked like she'd been struck. Who is JJP Consulting Services, and why did it receive $2.3 million from American Prosperity Advisors, a shell company funded by pharmaceutical corporations, during the same period you were telling your viewers that drug price negotiations were socialist tyranny? Silence, not metaphorical silence. Actual, dead silence in the studio. Judge Jeanine's mouth opened slightly. Her hands, which had been resting casually on the desk, gripped the edge. Her eyes darted to someone off camera, a producer, maybe, or a director, looking for help that wasn't coming. The moderator was frozen, clearly receiving instructions through his earpiece, but too shocked to respond. And Crockett kept going, knowing she had seconds before they cut away. The American people deserve to know when they're watching journalism and when they're watching purchased propaganda. They deserve to know who's really writing the script. And they deserve answers about why someone who calls themselves a judge would secretly take millions from the very interests she's supposed to be. The screen went black. Not a cut to the moderator, not a camera change, just black. For 3 seconds that felt like an eternity. Millions of Fox News viewers stared at blank screens. Then suddenly, we'll be right back after this commercial break. 67 seconds. From the moment Crockett started speaking to the moment the screen went dark, exactly 67 seconds had elapsed. But in those 67 seconds, everything had changed. What viewers at home didn't see, but what everyone in that studio witnessed, was what happened the moment they cut to commercial. Judge Jeanine Pirro exploded. "Are you kidding me?" Her voice, usually so controlled and measured on air, came out as a shriek. "Who cleared this? Who the hell cleared her to come on here and—" She ripped off her microphone, the equipment clattering against the desk. "This is slander. This is defamation. I want our lawyers on the phone right now." The moderator tried to interject. "Jeanine, we need to—" "Don't tell me what we need to do." She was standing now, pointing at someone off camera. "You ambushed me. You brought her here to ambush me on my own network." Crockett sat calmly, watching the meltdown with the cool assessment of an attorney who'd just gotten exactly the reaction she was hoping for. One of the other panelists, a Republican congressman who'd been silent during Crockett's allegations, quietly removed his own microphone and backed away from the desk. He wanted no part of whatever was happening.
A producer rushed onto the set trying to calm Judge Jeanine down.
"We're on commercial. We have 2 minutes. We need to sue her." Jeanine's finger was now pointed directly at Crockett. "She just accused me of corruption on national television. She named me specifically. We are going to destroy her." Crockett finally spoke, her voice infuriatingly calm. "Actually, Judge Pirro, I didn't name you. I described a pattern of undisclosed payments and asked you a question about a specific transaction. If you're saying that description refers to you, well, that's quite an admission." The look on Judge Jeanine's face was something Crockett had seen before in courtrooms. The moment a witness realizes they've just incriminated themselves. You are... Jeanine sputtered, her face flushed red. "This is gotcha journalism. This is a hit job." "It's funny you should mention journalism," Crockett replied, still seated, still calm, "because that's exactly what I'm questioning. Is it journalism when pharmaceutical companies pay you millions and you attack drug pricing legislation? Or is that something else? I have never let my personal finances influence my coverage. Never. Then why didn't you disclose those finances? Why hide them behind shell companies?" The producer was frantically gesturing now. They had 30 seconds before they were back on air. "Jeanine, we need you to sit down. We need to finish the panel and—" "I'm not sitting next to her." Jeanine grabbed her notes, her water bottle, everything on the desk in front of her. "I'm done. I'm calling legal, and she better have a good lawyer because—" 15 seconds! Someone called out. The moderator looked panicked. "Jeanine, please, we need to figure it out." And with that, Judge Jeanine Pirro stormed off the set, her heels clicking loudly on the studio floor, the sound picked up by the microphone still active on the desk. 10 seconds. The producer was gesturing frantically at the moderator, at the remaining panelists, trying to figure out how to salvage the show. 5 seconds. The moderator straightened his tie, took a breath, and prepared to do, "What? How do you come back from that?" They were back on air. The moderator's face filled the screen, and you could see him making a split-second decision. "Welcome back. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with our panel. We're going to go ahead and move to our next segment." And bar no explanation, no addressing what had just happened, just a desperate attempt to move on and pretend that one of their biggest stars hadn't just melted down on live television. But it was too late. Within seconds, literally seconds, social media exploded. Media watchdog, did Judge Jeanine just storm off set after being confronted about $8.07 in payments? Fox News is bit beyond and political junkie. Someone clip that. Jasmine Crockett just ended Judge Jeanine's career in 67 seconds. Jeanine. Fox News just cut to black after Repra. Crockett exposed financial ties. This is insane. And media corruption. Beyond the hashtag X67 seconds was trending within 5 minutes. By the time the show ended 30 minutes later, it was the #1 trend in the United States. By midnight, it was trending worldwide. Because here's what had happened. Dozens of people in that studio had phones, production assistants, camera operators, other staff who had watched the entire meltdown during the commercial break. And while they couldn't broadcast it officially, they could describe it. They could tell Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok exactly what had happened when the cameras were off. She was screaming. One anonymous production assistant posted, "I've worked here for 5 years and I've never seen anything like it. She completely lost it." Another staffer shared, "Crockett stayed completely calm while Judge Jeanine threatened to sue her. It was like watching a lawyer dismantle a witness on the stand." His descriptions matched perfectly with what viewers had seen in those 67 seconds before the cutaway. Judge Jeanine's face going white, her hands gripping the desk, the panic in her eyes. And then people started finding the documents. This is where Crockett's strategy showed its genius. She hadn't just made allegations on TV. Her office had been ready. The moment she finished speaking on air, her staff released a comprehensive report online. 247 pages of bank records, corporate filings, timeline analyses, and documented evidence of every claim she'd made. It was all there. All $8.7 million traced through all 23 shell companies connected to all the corporations with legislative interests, every payment matched with corresponding on-air advocacy, a forensic financial investigation presented in clear, undeniable detail. And it was impossible for Fox News to suppress, because it was public record, congressional research, available to any journalist who wanted to verify it. By 11 p.m., the New York Times had reporters digging through the documents. By midnight, the Washington Post confirmed the key allegations. By 1 a.m., even conservative news outlets were forced to acknowledge the story, not because they wanted to, but because their audiences were demanding answers. Judge Jeanine Pirro's Twitter account, which usually posted multiple times a day, went silent. Fox News' official response, when it finally came at 2:30 a.m., was a masterclass in corporate non-denial. Fox News maintains the highest standards of journalistic integrity. All of our hosts comply with relevant disclosure requirements. We do not comment on the personal financial arrangements of our employees. Notice what they didn't say. They didn't deny the allegations. They didn't say the payments didn't happen. They didn't defend Judge Jeanine. They just said nothing of substance while pretending to say something. But the American public isn't stupid. They could read between the lines. What happened next was extraordinary. Within 48 hours, 3 major advertisers pulled their commercials from Judge Jeanine's show, pending review of recent allegations. Within 72 hours, that number had grown to 17. A week later, 2 separate congressional committees announced investigations into undisclosed financial relationships between media personalities and corporate interests. The Federal Communications Commission opened an inquiry into whether Fox News had violated disclosure requirements. And Judge Jeanine Pirro? She disappeared, not literally. She was still in New York, presumably consulting with lawyers and crisis management teams. But publicly? She vanished. Her Saturday show was suddenly hosted by a guest host with no explanation. Her Twitter went dark. Her scheduled public appearances were quietly cancelled. For someone who had spent a decade in the constant spotlight, the silence was deafening. But the story didn't end there, because Crockett's investigation hadn't just targeted one person. Judge Jeanine was the biggest name, the most dramatic confrontation. But the documents revealed something larger. She was part of a system. The same shell companies that paid her had also paid others. 3 other Fox News personalities were named in the documents, though with smaller payments. 2 CNN contributors, a prominent political podcaster, 4 syndicated radio hosts, an entire ecosystem of paid advocacy masquerading as independent commentary. The scale was staggering. Over $40 million in undisclosed payments spread across dozens of media figures, all from the same network of shell companies, all funded by the same industries with legislative interests. It was a coordinated influence operation, hidden in plain sight, using trusted media voices to manipulate public opinion on behalf of corporate interests. And it had been going on for years. Media critics had a field day. "We always knew there were conflicts of interest," one wrote, "but we thought it was book deals and speaking fees. We had no idea there was a secret payment system specifically designed to hide financial relationships." Journalism schools added new case studies about disclosure requirements. Ethics boards revised their guidelines, and across newsrooms in America, journalists started asking uncomfortable questions about their own colleagues. Who else was part of this? How deep did it go? The psychological impact on the public was profound. Trust in media, already at historic lows, plummeted further. But interestingly, it wasn't uniform. People stopped trusting specific personalities and networks, but they started paying more attention to financial disclosure. They started asking who was funding the commentary they were consuming. In a weird way, Crockett's exposure had created a more informed, more skeptical audience. But the biggest question remained: what would happen to Judge Jeanine Pirro? 2 weeks after the 67-second confrontation, Judge Jeanine's legal team made their move. They filed a defamation lawsuit against Jasmine Crockett, seeking $50 million in damages. The complaint was 73 pages long, and argued that Crockett had maliciously and falsely accused a respected journalist of corruption, causing irreparable harm to her reputation and career. It claimed that the $8.7 million in payments were legitimate consulting fees for legal expertise, and that Crockett had deliberately mischaracterized routine business transactions as corruption. The lawsuit generated new headlines. Judge Jeanine fires back. $50 million defamation suit against Congresswoman Crockett. Some political analysts thought Jeanine had made a smart move. She's going on offense, they said. She's forcing Crockett to prove her allegations in court, where there are actual consequences for false statements. But lawyers who actually read the complaint saw something different. "This is a terrible idea," one defamation expert told reporters. "Pirro is a public figure, which means the standard for defamation is incredibly high. Crockett would have to have known her statements were false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth, and Crockett has 247 pages of documented evidence. This lawsuit is going to backfire spectacularly." They were right, because here's what Judge Jeanine's legal team apparently didn't consider. Filing a defamation lawsuit opened up the discovery process. Discovery is the pre-trial phase where both sides can demand documents, take depositions, and compel testimony under oath. It's designed to prevent surprise in court, to make sure all the relevant evidence is available to both parties. And Crockett's legal team. Remember, she was a civil rights attorney before she was a congresswoman, and she had very good lawyers. Immediately filed sweeping discovery requests. They demanded all of Judge Jeanine's tax returns for the past 7 years. all contracts and agreements with JJP Consulting Services and any related entities, all communications with American Prosperity Advisors and the 22 other shell companies, all emails, texts, and messages related to her on-air coverage of pharmaceutical, energy, and defense issues, depositions of Fox News executives about their knowledge of these financial arrangements. Testimony from the whistleblower Crockett had mentioned Judge Jeanine's lawyers immediately moved to limit discovery, arguing it was overly broad and harassing. But the judge, a federal district court judge with no connection to Fox News, disagreed. If Ms. Pirro is claiming that these were legitimate business arrangements that were mischaracterized, the judge ruled, then the nature and full scope of those arrangements is directly relevant to the case. Discovery will proceed. It was a devastating blow. Because now, instead of this story fading away, it was going to be examined in excruciating detail under oath, with legal penalties for anyone who lied. Fox News executives were panicking. They hadn't authorized this lawsuit. Judge Jeanine had filed it personally, perhaps against their advice, and now their internal communications were going to be subpoenaed. Their knowledge of these financial arrangements was going to be questioned under oath. 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Fox News made a stunning announcement. Judge Jeanine Pirro and Fox News have mutually agreed to part ways. We thank her for her years of service and wish her well in her future endeavors. It was corporate speak for, "She's fired, and we're trying to distance ourselves before this gets worse." Judge Jeanine's show was cancelled. Her program was replaced immediately, with no farewell episode, no retrospective, no acknowledgement of her decade-long run. She simply disappeared from the network she'd called home. And with her gone, Fox News' legal team made their own move. They filed a motion to dismiss themselves from the discovery process, arguing that they were not parties to the defamation suit and therefore couldn't be compelled to produce documents. Crockett's lawyers opposed the motion, arguing that Fox News had knowledge of and potentially facilitated the undisclosed financial arrangements. The legal battle was just beginning, but something else was happening too, something that would ultimately prove more important than any lawsuit. While lawyers fought in court, Congress was taking action. Remember those 2 congressional committees that announced investigations? They moved fast. The House Oversight Committee, which Jasmine Crockett sat on, launched a formal inquiry into undisclosed financial relationships between media personalities and corporate interests. They issued subpoenas to 15 different shell companies, demanding full disclosure of all payments made to media figures over the past 5 years. They called executives from major networks to testify about their disclosure policies and what they knew about their hosts' outside income. And they didn't limit their investigation to Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, Newsmax, OAN. Every major news network was scrutinized. The hearings were explosive. CNN's president was forced to admit that 2 of their contributors had received undisclosed payments from the shell company network. Both were suspended pending internal review. MSNBC revealed that one of their weekend hosts had consulting arrangements that should have been disclosed but weren't. That host resigned. Even PBS, public television supposedly above commercial influence, discovered that one of their regular panelists had received speaking fees from organizations linked to the shell companies. It was an industry-wide scandal, and it was forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. But the most dramatic moment came when the House Oversight Committee called executives from American Prosperity Advisors, the shell company at the center of Judge Jeanine's payments, to testify. The CEO of the company, a man named Richard Thorne, who'd been virtually unknown before the scandal, was asked directly, "Mr. Thorne, what service did JJP Consulting provide that justified $2.3 million in payments?" Thorne, clearly uncomfortable, read from a prepared statement. JJP Consulting provided strategic advisory services related to media strategy and public policy communications. Can you be more specific? What actual work product did they deliver? I would have to review our files to provide specific details. Mr. Thorne, you're the CEO. You signed off on $2.3 million in payments. You're telling this committee you don't remember what you paid for? The silence was damning. Another committee member asked the question everyone was thinking. Mr. Thorne, isn't it true that these weren't payments for services? That they were payments to ensure favorable media coverage for your client's legislative interests? I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The hearing room erupted, because invoking the Fifth Amendment isn't an admission of guilt. Legally, it can't be used against you in a criminal trial, but in the court of public opinion, it's devastating. It said, yes, if I answer that question honestly, I might incriminate myself in a crime. The committee members pounced. Who directed you to make these payments? Fifth Amendment. Did you make similar payments to other media personalities? Fifth Amendment. Were these payments designed to influence coverage of specific legislation? Fifth Amendment. For 45 minutes, Richard Thorne invoked his Fifth Amendment rights 63 times, and with each invocation, the scandal grew deeper. Because if these payments were legitimate consulting fees, why would answering questions about them be self-incriminating? The only reason to take the Fifth is if you believe your answers could expose you to criminal prosecution, which meant that someone, maybe Thorne, maybe his clients, maybe the media personalities who received the money, believed that laws had been broken. The Department of Justice announced it was opening a criminal investigation 3 days later. Remember the whistleblower Crockett mentioned during those 67 seconds? The one willing to testify about the scheme? 6 weeks after the initial confrontation, that whistleblower came forward publicly. Her name was Sarah Chen. She was 34 years old, a former accountant for one of the shell companies in the network, and she had been keeping records for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to expose what she'd seen. She held a press conference in Washington, D.C., flanked by her attorneys and Jasmine Crockett herself. What Chen revealed was even worse than the initial allegations. I was hired by American Prosperity Advisors in 2019, she began, reading from a statement but occasionally looking up to make eye contact with the cameras. I thought I was taking a normal accounting job, but within weeks I realized something was wrong. She described how the shell companies operated. They would receive large payments from corporations and then redistribute that money to media personalities through consulting contracts, speaking fees, and advisory agreements. But here's what made it corrupt, Chen continued, her voice gaining strength. The media personalities knew exactly where the money was coming from. They received detailed briefings about which topics to cover, which positions to take, and which legislation to attack or defend. She pulled out a stack of documents, emails mostly, with names and identifying information redacted for legal reasons. I have emails where media personalities were given talking points directly from corporate lobbyists. I have payment schedules that show bonuses for particularly effective segments. I have performance reviews that evaluated media figures based on how well their coverage aligned with corporate interests. The press conference room was silent except for the rapid clicking of cameras. This wasn't journalism, it was pay-for-play propaganda, and the American people had no idea they were watching it. Chen's most damning revelation came next. In January 2022, I was asked to prepare a payment of $500,000 to JJP Consulting, Judge Jeanine Pirro's company. The payment memo, which I was told to write, said it was for strategic media consulting on pharmaceutical policy. She paused, letting that sink in. The payment was made on January 15th. On January 22nd, Judge Jeanine did a segment attacking Medicare drug price negotiations, calling it government overreach. On January 29th, she interviewed a senator who was opposing the legislation and praised him for standing up for free markets. On February 5th, she did an entire opening monologue about how drug price controls would destroy innovation, and none of her viewers knew that she'd just been paid $500,000 by the very pharmaceutical companies that would lose billions if that legislation passed. Chen had receipts for everything: bank transfers, email instructions, payment schedules, performance evaluations. But her most explosive document was something she called the playbook. It was a 47-page internal document that laid out the entire strategy: which media personalities to target for recruitment, how much to pay them, how to structure payments to avoid disclosure requirements, which topics were priority issues for different corporate clients, and how to measure the return on investment of media spending. The playbook treated journalism like advertising. It calculated the cost per favorable mention and the audience reach per dollar spent. It ranked media personalities by their influence score and their willingness to align messaging, and Judge Jeanine Pirro was ranked second on their list of high-value media assets. She was expensive, Chen explained, but they considered her worth it because she had a loyal audience, a legal background that gave her credibility, and a willingness to take aggressive positions that other hosts wouldn't. The document revealed that Judge Jeanine wasn't a victim who'd been tricked into this arrangement. She was an active, willing participant who negotiated her rates and knew exactly what she was being paid to do. Chen's testimony changed everything. This was no longer just about undisclosed payments or conflicts of interest. This was about a coordinated scheme to manipulate public opinion on behalf of corporate interests, using trusted media voices as vehicles for purchased propaganda. And it was criminal. Judge Jeanine Pirro's response to Sarah Chen's testimony was swift and vicious. Within hours of the press conference, her legal team released a statement calling Chen a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind and dismissing her claims as fabricated conspiracy theories designed to destroy a respected journalist's career. But the statement made a critical error. It attacked Chen's credibility without actually denying the specific allegations. Crockett noticed immediately. So did legal analysts covering the case. They're not saying the documents are fake, one former prosecutor pointed out on CNN. They're not saying the payments didn't happen, they're just attacking the messenger. That's what lawyers do when they can't attack the message. 2 days after Chen's press conference, Judge Jeanine broke her month-long silence with an interview on Newsmax, a rival conservative network that was more than happy to provide her a friendly platform. The interview was remarkable. Judge Jeanine, sitting in what appeared to be her home office, looked tired. The confident, aggressive personality that had defined her television presence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like vulnerability. But don't mistake that for honesty. "I am the victim of a political witch hunt," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Congresswoman Crockett has targeted me because of my conservative views, because I've been effective at exposing liberal hypocrisy, because I've stood up for traditional American values." She painted herself as a martyr, persecuted for her beliefs. "Yes, I received consulting fees. Yes, I provided strategic advice to various organizations. That's what people with my legal and media expertise do. It's not corruption, it's capitalism." The Newsmax host predictably lobbed softball questions. "Do you feel this is an attack on conservative media?" "Absolutely. Where's the investigation into liberal commentators and their funding? Where's the scrutiny of left-wing media personalities?" "This is selective enforcement designed to silence conservative voices. It was a classic deflection strategy. Admit nothing, attack the investigators, claim victimhood, and try to make this about political bias rather than financial corruption. And for her existing supporters, it might have worked." Fox News forums and conservative social media rallied around her. #IStandWithJeanine trended among right-wing accounts. Some supporters even started a GoFundMe to help with her legal expenses, raising over $200,000 in the first 48 hours. But there was a problem with Judge Jeanine's defense. The evidence didn't care about her spin. The next week, the House Oversight Committee released a preliminary report on their investigation. It was 312 pages long and devastating in its detail. The report confirmed $8.7 million in payments to JJP Consulting from the shell company network MWRD, direct correlation between payment dates, on-air coverage beneficial to paying industries NBRD. Evidence that Judge Jeanine had received topic briefings from corporate interests before segments NWRD. Documentation that she'd adjusted her coverage based on feedback from paying clients NWR and P. That she'd negotiated higher fees for covering particularly controversial topics, the report concluded. The evidence suggests a systematic scheme to use undisclosed financial arrangements to manipulate media coverage of legislative issues, representing a fundamental corruption of journalistic integrity and a fraud on the American viewing public. But the report went further. It recommended new federal disclosure requirements for media personalities, criminal investigation into potential fraud and lobbying violations, FCC review of broadcast licenses for networks that facilitated undisclosed financial relationships, civil penalties for networks and personalities who violated existing disclosure rules. The recommendations had teeth, real consequences, not just reputational damage, but potential criminal charges, financial penalties, and industry-wide reforms. Judge Jeanine's counterattack was crumbling under the weight of evidence. As damning as the investigation into Judge Jeanine was, it represented just the tip of the iceberg. Remember, Sarah Chen's documents had revealed that Jeanine was second on the list of high-value media assets, which raised an obvious question. Who was first? The House Oversight Committee was building toward that reveal, carefully documenting each case, building a comprehensive picture of the corruption scheme. But then someone leaked. On a Tuesday morning in November, an anonymous source provided the Washington Post with a portion of the playbook that the committee hadn't yet released publicly. The headline that afternoon stopped the political world in its tracks. Secret documents reveal $23 million paid to media figures across political spectrum. The article revealed that the corruption wasn't limited to conservative media. Liberal commentators had been paid too. Political podcasters across the ideological spectrum, even some supposedly independent journalists. The first-ranked high-value media asset was a prime-time cable news host who'd been receiving over $3 million annually from the shell company network. The article didn't name them yet, but it provided enough details that media insiders immediately started speculating. Within 24 hours, 3 different media personalities preemptively resigned from their positions, citing personal reasons but clearly trying to get ahead of the story. 1 CNN contributor, 2 MSNBC commentators, a Fox Business host, and a prominent political podcast host all announced they were stepping away to spend more time with family or pursuing new opportunities. The excuse was transparent. They were jumping before they were pushed. But the most shocking revelation from the leaked documents was about the scope of the operation. This wasn't just about getting favorable coverage for pharmaceutical companies or energy corporations. The scheme had expanded to include foreign governments paying media personalities to advocate for friendly foreign policy positions, tech companies funding favorable coverage during antitrust debates, financial institutions paying for opposition to regulatory reforms, even political campaigns secretly funding independent media voices to attack their opponents. The corruption was bipartisan, cross-ideological, and systemic. It wasn't a few bad actors. It was an entire shadow economy of purchased influence, operating behind the facade of independent journalism. Social media exploded with anger, but this time it wasn't divided along partisan lines. People across the political spectrum were unified in their fury at being manipulated. #media corruption trended for 6 straight days. #defund propaganda became a rallying cry. #trust no one, while somewhat nihilistic, captured the public mood. If they'd been lied to about this, what else were they being lied to about? Cable news ratings plummeted. People stopped watching political commentary shows, unable to trust whether they were hearing honest analysis or paid propaganda. Podcast downloads for political shows dropped by 30% industry-wide. Traditional news outlets that focused on reporting rather than commentary saw their audiences grow as people sought information they could trust. The scandal was forcing a fundamental reckoning with how Americans consumed political media. And at the center of it all was Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman who'd started this earthquake with 67 seconds of truth-telling. But we need to talk about what this cost Jasmine Crockett personally, because standing up to powerful interests doesn't come without consequences, and Crockett was paying a price that most people never saw. The death threat started within hours of the initial confrontation. "You're dead, Beanie. We know where you live. Traitor. You attacked a patriot. You'll pay for this. Liberal scum. Someone needs to teach you a lesson." Her congressional office received over 3,000 threatening emails in the first week alone. Her personal phone number was leaked online, and she received hundreds of menacing calls. Her home address was posted on extremist forums, along with encouragement to pay her a visit. The Capitol Police took the threats seriously enough to assign her additional security. She couldn't go to her district office without armed guards. Her family received protection. Her mother, a retired school teacher in Texas, was harassed at her church. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on her garage door. Her elderly father received threatening letters at his home. This wasn't just political opposition. This was coordinated intimidation designed to punish her for speaking truth and to discourage anyone else from following her example. Fox News, while officially condemning threats, allowed certain personalities to fuel the fire. One host called Crockett the most dangerous member of Congress and suggested she was trying to destroy conservative media. Another described her investigation as an attack on free speech and political persecution. The message was clear. Crockett was the villain, and Judge Jeanine was the victim. Some of Crockett's Democratic colleagues quietly urged her to back down. "You've made your point," one senior member told her privately. "But you're becoming too much of a lightning rod. It's making it harder for the rest of us to get work done." Translation: your truth-telling is making powerful people uncomfortable, and that's bad for our relationships with donors and media figures we need to stay on good terms with. Crockett refused. "I didn't come here to make people comfortable," she told her staff during a particularly difficult week. "I came here to tell the truth, and if that means I'm standing alone, then I'm standing alone." But she wasn't alone. Grassroots supporters rallied around her. Small-dollar donations flooded her campaign account, over $4 million in the first month after the confrontation, almost all of it in contributions under $50. Progressive organizations made her a hero. Students on college campuses organized Crockett truth-telling events. Young people who'd been cynical about politics suddenly saw someone in government fighting for transparency. A petition supporting her investigation and calling for media reform gathered 2.3 million signatures in 3 weeks. She received letters from ordinary Americans thanking her for exposing the corruption they'd suspected but couldn't prove. I always felt like something was off when I watched the news. Now I know why. Thank you for having the courage to stand up to these powerful people. You're the kind of representative we need more of in Washington. The support was real and heartfelt, but it didn't make the threats less frightening or the pressure less intense. In a rare, vulnerable moment during a podcast interview, Crockett admitted, "There are nights I lie awake wondering if I did the right thing. Not because I think I was wrong, the evidence is overwhelming, but because I see what it's costing my family, my staff, people I care about. But then I think about all the Americans who've been manipulated by this system, who've been lied to by people they trusted, who've made political decisions based on propaganda they thought was journalism. And I remember why this matters." The interviewer asked, "Would you do it again? If you could go back to that moment in the Fox News studio, knowing everything that would happen afterward, would you still do it?" Crockett didn't hesitate. Absolutely, every single time. By December, the legal landscape had become extraordinarily complex. Judge Jeanine's defamation lawsuit against Crockett was still pending, but it was going nowhere. Discovery was producing document after document that supported Crockett's allegations, and Jeanine's lawyers were fighting a losing battle to keep evidence out of the public record. But that was just one lawsuit among many. The Department of Justice's criminal investigation had expanded dramatically. Federal prosecutors had impaneled a grand jury and were examining potential violations of lobbying disclosure laws, tax fraud, if income was hidden or misreported, wire fraud, if the scheme used electronic communications to defraud the public, conspiracy charges. At least 15 media personalities had retained criminal defense attorneys, including Judge Jeanine Pirro. The shell companies at the center of the scheme were being systematically dismantled. Bank accounts were frozen. Corporate officers were subpoenaed. The paper trail was being followed to its source, and that source led somewhere unexpected. A coordinated network of dark money organizations that had been operating for over a decade, funded by a small group of billionaires and major corporations, all designed to manipulate public opinion on key legislative issues.
This wasn't just about paying a few media personalities. This was about building an entire infrastructure of influence, hidden from public view, operating in the shadows of American democracy. The civil lawsuits were equally significant. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of Fox News viewers, arguing that they'd been defrauded by watching paid propaganda disguised as journalism. The lawsuit sought damages and demanded fundamental changes to how networks disclosed financial relationships. Similar lawsuits were filed against other networks. Media watchdog organizations filed complaints with the Federal Communications Commission, arguing that broadcast licenses should be revoked for networks that had systematically deceived their audiences, and individual advertisers started filing their own suits, arguing that they'd paid premium rates for advertising during shows they thought had authentic audiences, not knowing those audiences were being cultivated through paid propaganda. The legal bills were mounting into the hundreds of millions. Insurance companies were refusing to cover the costs, arguing that fraud wasn't covered under media liability policies. Several smaller media companies declared bankruptcy, unable to handle the legal exposure. And throughout it all, Sarah Chen's testimony remained the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. She had been deposed for 14 hours across 3 days. She'd provided testimony to the grand jury. She'd turned over thousands of documents, and she'd received death threats that made Crockett's look tame by comparison. Chen was in witness protection now, her location known only to federal marshals and prosecutors. She couldn't work, couldn't return to her apartment, couldn't maintain a normal life. She'd sacrificed everything to tell the truth. In a written statement released through her attorneys, Chen explained why. "I spent 3 years watching this corruption happen, knowing it was wrong, but too afraid to speak up. I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of retaliation, afraid of what powerful people might do to me. But when I saw Congresswoman Crockett stand up in that Fox News studio and expose what I'd been documenting in secret, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. She was brave enough to speak truth to power, so I had to be brave enough to back her up with evidence. The American people deserve to know when they're being lied to. They deserve to know when their news is really propaganda. They deserve to make informed decisions based on truth, not manipulation. Whatever happens to me, I can live with myself knowing I did the right thing." As 2025 progressed, the mounting legal pressure became unbearable for some of the defendants. In January, the first settlement was announced. One of the shell companies, a smaller operation that had paid several media personalities lower amounts, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges against its officers. The cooperation agreement required them to provide complete financial records, testimony about who had directed the payments, documents showing the corporate interests behind the funding, evidence of coordination with media personalities. It was a breakthrough for prosecutors, and it terrified everyone else involved in the scheme. Because cooperation agreements create a prisoner's dilemma. The first people to flip get the best deals. Everyone else faces harsher consequences. Within 3 weeks, 2 more shell companies had reached cooperation agreements. Then individual media personalities started cutting their own deals. A cable news contributor no one had heard of, someone who'd received relatively modest payments totaling $400,000, became the first media figure to plead guilty to federal charges. He was sentenced to probation, a significant fine, and permanent banishment from journalism. But more importantly, he provided testimony about how the system worked from the media side, how the deals were pitched, how the payments were structured, how the talking points were delivered. His testimony opened the door for prosecutors to pursue bigger fish. In February, Fox News itself reached a confidential settlement with the FCC. The terms weren't disclosed publicly, but reports indicated the network paid a substantial fine and agreed to implement new disclosure policies. They also agreed not to rehire anyone found to have participated in undisclosed financial arrangements.
That settlement effectively ended any chance of Judge Jeanine returning to Fox News. CNN and MSNBC reached similar settlements within weeks. The major networks were trying to move past the scandal, to clean house and regain credibility. They implemented new ethics policies, hired outside firms to audit their personalities' financial relationships, and made very public commitments to transparency. Whether these reforms would last or were just public relations exercises remained to be seen. But Judge Jeanine Pirro herself hadn't settled. She was still fighting, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong, still claiming to be a victim of political persecution. Her legal team had filed multiple motions to dismiss the various cases against her. All had been denied. Her defamation lawsuit against Crockett was collapsing. Discovery had revealed so much damning evidence that her own lawyers were reportedly advising her to drop the case. But she refused. She'd built her entire career on projecting strength, on never backing down, on attacking her enemies relentlessly. She couldn't admit defeat without undermining everything she'd built, so she fought on even as the walls closed in around her. In March, federal prosecutors made their move. A grand jury handed down a 37-count indictment against Judge Jeanine Pirro, charging her with conspiracy to defraud the United States, making false statements on disclosure forms, tax fraud for failing to report income correctly, wire fraud for using electronic communications to perpetrate the scheme.